the other thing is that I feel like a lot of fans and a lot of people can relate with the idea of being really close to something special and having a lot of flair and a lot of elbow grease and a lot of everything, and it's just not quite enough. And I think a lot of times in our society, those are actually the more interesting stories to tell. Everybody loves a winner, and I'm from Chicago, so I got a chance. I had to sit with your question of best memories. I went to some Bulls playoff games during the Jordan era. I went to a decent amount of Bulls games during the Jordan era and got to watch him play live. But it was kind of a rite of passage in Chicago being able to watch the Bulls and have them parade during the summer because it happened every year. The Knicks never had that experience. They did not have the talent that the Bulls had. They weren't really supposed to be that team in the winner's circle at the end, but they almost got there. And I think that there are a lot of people that can relate with just hard work. And even when you work hard and even when you feel like you deserve it, you don't quite get there. It's kind of more of a Shakespearean story in that way, that they got close that many times and just didn't quite ever get it done. But that is what the Knicks and what their fans would like to think of that franchise as, is just hardworking. It doesn't always work, but you're going to give yourself a chance because of the hard work. And I think that between that and some of the just iconic personalities between a Mason or a Starks or an Oakley, those things resonated. Obviously, Pat Riley's story was really unique, and the way he left was really heartbreaking and really unique. And Knicks fans remember every bit of that. Charles Smith's story was really unique in a way that a lot of Knicks fans hate him for, but that is something that is kind of like only in New York, and just a New York tragedy for a lot of fans. And I think that I have had fans tell me as well, I want to read your book and I can't. It's still too painful. Wow. And I think that's the nature of what the 90s were like. They were that close, but even being that close to ecstasy is painful for a lot of fans still. So it's just a really unique story, and I think better in some ways than a team that wins 5 or 6 championships where we kind of got to know everything about them. That wasn't the case with the Knicks.
You kind of stole my question. It might be weird for me to say this, but you sparked an idea in my mind. If the Knicks would have been like a huge dynasty, do you think they would have been just as beloved? So let's say they were able to, if Jordan never wins a title, they just play like an alternate dimension. The Knicks dominate the Bulls. Jordan's unable to beat them, and the Knicks are a dynasty throughout the 90s. Are they as beloved, as opposed to what they experienced for real in terms of all that heartbreak, you think?
I mean, probably. Man, that's a hell of a dilemma to think about. Because think about it this way. If they win 6 titles instead of Michael Jordan's not having a 6-part documentary made about him. We're questioning if he gets one made at all because he didn't win a championship. It'd be a lot like asking. I mean, I guess KD has won titles at this point because of his time with Golden State. But if he hadn't, I'm not sure what Michael's career is. Like, maybe you have to start thinking more about like a Mike Trout or someone that is like obviously the best player in the sport for a few years, but doesn't ever win anything meaningful. How do you think about that? And I will say this, there was an interview, and funny enough, the interview was between Pat Riley when he was with NBC before he took the Knicks job, kind of in that sabbatical he was taking. And he was interviewing Michael Jordan, and it was before Michael Jordan knocked out the Pistons for the first time. He was on the cusp of doing it. I think he was a game or two removed from doing it. And he said, Pat asked him, he said, there are people that already think that you're on the trajectory or have a good chance to finish as the greatest player of all time, but you've never won a title. How do you square those two things? Do you feel like your career will be deserving of having people talk about it that way if you never win a title? And that is kind of one of those weird what ifs where now we got to see it play out and we see the way he's talked about. I don't know how he would have been talked about had he not won a title, but if you literally kind of do a transitive property thing and even just on this base level, each time Michael retired from the sport, the Knicks went to the finals immediately after that same season, 94 and 99. So if that's the way we're thinking about it, if the Knicks all of a sudden become that team that just walks into that opening, the way we think about them is different, but I can't imagine them being less beloved. Nobody dislikes the Yankees. The Yankee fans don't dislike the Yankees or not love the Yankees. They are passionately yearning for more titles, and they're wanting to fire Aaron Boone every year that they don't win one now because of the expectation that's been set. So I think the Knicks would have been even more beloved. I also wonder this, because this is a big part of my book as well. I'm not necessarily taking sides here, but I don't think the league wanted teams to replicate the Knicks style of play. The Knicks kind of took what the Pistons had been doing and extended it further into that era. And the Knicks basically acknowledged when you interview them for the book and Riley and what they're trying to do, they knew they didn't have as much talent as the Bulls. They knew they didn't have as much skill as the Bulls, but they could work harder than them, they could play harder than them, and they could play a little dirtier than them and try to knock the Bulls off their square by scaring them a little bit. If that style of play had been victorious and they had won several titles with it, what does it mean for the physicality of the league? Would we still be in an NBA that operated more like the 80s Pistons than the 2016, 17, 18, 19 Warriors, which is what we moved towards because it was rooted more in skill than physicality? So that's another question. But I think they would be just as beloved, if not more, by the fan base. They also would be probably more iconic on a national scale as far as dynasties, love them or hate them, they draw more attention. They get more viewership. And as popular as the Knicks already were during that era, I can't imagine them being less popular or less beloved, certainly by their own fan base.
I just brought that up because my dad's from Boston. He's a huge Red Sox fan. And before they won the title in 2004, I would hear him talk about like the stories of heartbreak. And now that they've won a title since then, like they've won championships and kind of the allures of like they won the first one. So it's kind of they're the elite. So
I see
that charm is gone. I guess that's where I'm getting at. It's just like
I hear you.
with the Knicks, like there's a charm about that team, even though they didn't achieve that ultimate goal. They still have just that fervor compared to I don't know. I honestly I don't know. I mean, you would know better than I would if the Knicks were to win the title. I mean, that love affair. I wonder would they still be lagging behind those '90s Knicks? I think it would, just from an outsider's perspective, in my opinion.
Sure. Now again, I probably zoned in too closely on the how would Knicks fans feel about it specifically, or maybe I brought that part up myself. Knicks fans would be bonkers for them even more so. I mean, these were people that, I remember the marketing person for the Knicks during those years telling me there were certain teams and certain events and certain things that were owned by the Madison Square Garden brand that were not selling. That when we said we'll throw in Knicks tickets if you buy this package of tickets for the ballet or the Knicks, whatever the Rockefeller Center, this or the holiday stuff, people would buy those tickets in droves if there was any tie to the Knicks whatsoever. Yeah. And so that's something that I think Knicks fans would have loved them even more if that's possible. I do think that there is something to be said for teams that have villains or perceived villains like a Draymond or something like that. We're sure the Knicks had an edge and a dirty aspect to the way they played. John Starks had a really hard foul on Kenny Anderson where Kenny Anderson fell hard and broke his wrist. And he clotheslined Scottie Pippen in a playoff game. There were all sorts of plays like that I think that would have become more heightened. But we see that sort of thing with the Warriors. I don't know if it made them less popular than anyone. It's hard to dissect that because the viewership is so high when you've got a team that wins every single year. The viewership was so high when the Bulls and Knicks played every year. Yeah. So, we did get to see that part of it. I do think Michael was a more marketable star than someone like Patrick Ewing. So there always would have been that. Patrick just did not speak openly as much and speak as much and didn't really have the megawatt smile that Michael did. He didn't want to be understood as much. He wanted to stay private, in part because of what his upbringing was like in Boston and the way he was treated at Georgetown and stuff like that. So I get it, but I don't know. It's such a hard hypothetical just because we did see what happened with the Bulls. The Knicks were probably never going to reach that stratosphere unless they'd won 2 or 3, but they, man, were they close. They had so many opportunities. They never did beat Michael in a series, but they had their chances. And even without that, it's really shocking to me and stunning to me how much the Knicks fans love that team to this day, even without them having won anything of historic significance.
Yeah, totally agree.